Hi everyone, we welcome you all to this week Tech Tuesday webinar on IPU consumption best practices. Today's speaker is Sriram Sheshadri, who is a Principal Solutions Architect from the Customer Success team, handling cloud data warehouse and data lake journeys for customer, and he has developed a niche in cloud data management solutions. Before we start the session, let's go through some of the housekeeping tips. The webinar is for 1 hour that includes 15 minutes Q&A. You can post your queries in Q&A box, which will be answered at the end of the presentation. All participants will be muted during the presentation. The session will be recorded and it will be available on our InfoSupport YouTube channel and Success portal where you'll be able to download the slide deck. Please feel free to submit your suggestion or feedback for this session in the post-webinar survey. The Success Portal is a micro-learning platform that offers free, unlimited learning to all the registered users. This feature-rich platform helps you learn and adapt to Informatica products better. The following are few important links that you can go over later. This will help you in your product adoption journey with Informatica. Over to you, Sriram. Thank you.
Hi all, this is Sriram Sheshadri here. I'm a Principal Solutions Architect here in Informatica. Today we're going to talk about some best practices around IPU consumption, focusing primarily on cloud data integration and cloud application integration, which is one of the most commonly used services in the IDMC cloud. So let's get started on that. We're going to take a quick recap on what the IPO is and the flexibility it kind of gives you to use the full potential of the IDMC platform. So the Informatica Processing Unit is the prepaid credit that will be assigned to your account once you're onboarded, and you could pretty much use the entitled IPUs for any cloud services that the platform offers. Every cloud service, every microservice in the platform has its own metering logic through how it calculates consumption, and it kind of aggregates and rolls up to your total IP usage that will be deducted from your entitled IPs. So no restriction on what services you could use. The IPU the total IPU entitled will get reset in every billing cycle. So you could focus on your business requirements and your use cases rather than navigating through licensing and figuring out if you have the right product or service, right? More flexibility, completely consumption based, no restriction on any cloud services that you could use. Just a quick, again, continuing the recap, the older model would focus on the list of different connectors that you would use. It also licensed on secure agents and so on. With the newer model, as I mentioned, there's no restriction on what services you could use. It's just the meter would vary based on the microservice that you are currently using. So there could be some services which would have the meter focusing on compute units. There'll be meters which calculate based on events. There'll be meters, for example, like mass ingestion, which will calculate based on volume per GB, or even like CDC or mass ingestion database, for example, which will calculate based on rows processed. So just the meter alone would be different, but it kind of gives you the complete flexibility on what cloud services you can use. So let's get started on integration as the first service. So if you've been using the newer IDMC model or the IPU-based model, you would have seen that the CDI meter is based on the number of cores or the number of CPU cores used and the duration of the job, right? So obviously, higher the core and higher the duration, it's going to spike up your IPUs, right? Now, the first place to kind of start your analysis on optimizing or making your IP consumption more efficient is going to be the detailed report, right? So the detailed report is available for you from the metering dashboard in Admin console. So once you get to the detailed report, you'd be able to see the jobs that are consuming the highest number of IPUs and see how you can kind of optimize the high consuming jobs, right? So if you kind of go to the let's kind of jump on to the metering dashboard to show you how to look at the detailed report and also look at the metering numbers for you to start your analysis, right? So just give me 1 second. All So the first place that you would look for the metering dashboard is going to be your admin console. You're going to your metering tab, and then once you go to your metering tab, you might have to click on that specific service. So, for example, you could click on the data integration service, choose an appropriate billing period that you want to start your analysis on, and then once you hit on the download button, you would get this window where you would choose the detailed report as an option, and then choose the start and end date for your analysis, right? So once you've exported this, um, you're going to see a new report like this, which would give you the list of all the jobs within the time frame that you chose, and their metered value, the number of cores that they used, the start and end time, and so on, right? So the main metric that you would actually focus on is going to be this metered value. You could actually sort this by descending, and then kind of go from there on the highest consuming metered value jobs, right? So just a point to note here is this is not your IPU. The IPU is basically the value that's multiplied with the rate for this service, and that would be your IPU cost for this specific job. For example, if you look at this task right here, the metered value for this task is 0.017, right? And based on your rate card for data integration, if you're the first year, the multiplier is going to be 0.16. So this metered value multiplied by 0.16 would actually give you the IPU cost of this specific job, right? Um, so once you have this report, this will be a good starting point to figure out if, say, the top 20 jobs in this report, if you sort by descending, for example, are the highest consuming jobs, then we can start going into each of those jobs and analyzing why did it even take the number of cores used, or if it ran for a really long time, was this something that's beyond the average runtime of the job, and so on, right? Which we'll talk about shortly on ways to optimize the job. But this would be a good starting point for you to start your analysis, right? Um, so going back here, the next option that you could kind of use to reduce your IPU burn is going to be if a job is compatible with advanced PDO, or what we call as push-down optimization, then that would be a very good way to make your jobs more efficient and reduce the IPU burn rate. So what happens with push-down is it kind of offloads the data processing from your local secure agent to the actual endpoint in itself, be it a database or even a cloud data warehouse, for example, and kind of reduce the resource crunch, or the duration of the job also. Um, when you kind of enable advanced push down, right? So and enabling advanced push down is pretty much just a toggle in your mapping task. So once you create a new mapping task, for example, you can just go to the schedule tab, and you'd actually see the different options for push down optimization, and you would just choose either source, target, or full. We've seen that in most of the cases, if your mapping is compatible for a full push down optimization, then you see a lot more reduction in your job duration. Not much if you do partial, like say source or target doesn't add a lot of value, but yeah, definitely if full push down is an option, then that would definitely reduce your overall duration of the job, thereby decreasing your IPU cost. Um, the next thing that we've seen is the scheduling, right? We kind of see a lot of scenarios where a lot of jobs are pretty much kind of packed or bucketed into one schedule or one specific time frame. And when a lot of the jobs are running at the same time in parallel, they're competing for resources. One job would be waiting for the resource which has been held by another job, thereby increasing the duration of the job, and so on, right? So pretty much you are in a situation where all of your parallel jobs are competing for resources, and thereby reducing, or I would say increasing the total duration of those individual jobs itself, right? So So this is the other conflict that we see with scheduling is a lot of times when customers run their tests or develop these mappings in their developer sandboxes or any other sandboxes, for example, they kind of turn on the schedule like it's in production and pretty much run it every 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever the schedule is set to, which kind of aggregates the total IPU cost overall, even though you actually wouldn't need those schedules running on your dev org or any other sandbox, which is production like, right? So you might be testing for the schedule just to make sure the frequency is pulling the delta, in the delta runs are working fine and all this stuff. But once it's ready for migration or if it's already migrated, um, we have seen cases where customers don't toggle or turn off the schedules and they just keep running on the sandbox. And then you'll see a huge spike in your sandbox IP consumption, which kind of adds up to your overall IP usage across all your orgs, right? So that's another common theme that we've seen with schedules. So just kind of quickly summarize here, make sure you have the right number of resources before you pack too many jobs in the same schedule. And also make sure that you're not running production-like frequencies in your dev QA sandboxes, which will also add up to the IPU. So you'll have to keep in mind that the IPU consumption does not change, or the meter is not at a discounted value or in a different rate just because it's running in dev or QA. For example, it's uniform across the org types, so it doesn't matter what kind of org you're running these jobs on. As long as the job is running, even if it succeeds or fails, you'll pretty much end up paying for the consumption or using up your IPUs, right? So that's something that you could look at if you see a lot of usage in your sandbox IPUs, for example. One other thing that we want to point out during your when you're developing CDQ jobs, for example, is CDQs are cloud data quality service. So we've seen customers where if they design a CDQ job, they also kind of add a lot more transformations which are CPU or resource heavy along with the CDQ job. So what happens is based on our metering, the rate for a CDK job is higher than a cloud data integration job. So even if a mapping contains one CDQ asset, we'll kind of tag that mapping as a CDQ mapping and assign that rate for that mapping, right? So for example, if you go back here, if you look at this mapping, for example, you have a verifier which is a CDQ asset, but you might have some heavy lifting transformations, say like aggregator, joiners, or even lookups, for example, which would add up to the overall course used or duration of the job. And if you recall from the rate card here, um, for a data quality job, the meter is going to be 0.38, right? So if you're going to add a lot more transformations into a CDQ mapping, you'll probably see the cost go up a little higher, the IPU cost go a little higher. So you might want to kind of split the task into doing only CDQ stuff, and then probably have another job which will do more CDI based transformations, right? So that's another other optimization that you could try out. Like we have seen customers where they have some very expensive lookups along with the CDQ transformations, and the total cost of the CDQ of that job would be like really high, right? So so splitting up your CDQ jobs with just doing CDQ and then having your CDA transformations, especially when they are heavy transformations, kind of isolated, would probably be another way to optimize for this. The next thing that we could use Ops Insights for your whole optimization exercise is figuring out what the resource utilization of your agent looks like or your agent group looks like, and then make sure you're rightly sized based on your job frequencies or your job runs, and then scaling up from there would be another way to kind of bring down your IPU cost, right? So what happens in the resource crunch scenarios is, as mentioned in your schedule conflict, you'll have a lot of these jobs fighting for resources at the same time, or even if there are just two or three jobs running in parallel, if they're not rightly sized, if you have a pretty um, lowly configured agent, for example, you will start seeing the CPU and the memory usage spiking up to a higher threshold, which would again, kind of increase the duration of the job totally, right? Or say, for example, if you have created the max ATM process, which is one of our secure agent configuration for increasing the number of parallel jobs, if you have kind of set it to a higher number, now you have a lot of jobs fighting for resources than the agent can handle, thereby increasing the duration of the job, right? So where ops insights comes into the picture is you can actually see these CPU, memory, and disk trends for your secure agent, and then if you actually see them breaching a higher threshold all the time, then you know that you have a sizing issue with your agent. You can basically scale horizontally or vertically based on your needs, and scale up the secure agents. And to kind of reiterate, the number of how you size your secure agents, or the number of secure agents you spin up, does not add to the IPU cost as such. Only if the job runs on those agents, it's again just consumption based, right? So you can spin up how many of the agents you want with any kind of configuration. There's no additional IPU cost just for setting up an agent, right? So option size kind of gives you that overall trend for you to look at your resource usage, and then see how you can scale up your infrastructure, right? Before I kind of jump onto the demo, the other point I want to talk about with using Ops Insights is, there could be a lot of scenarios where you would see there'll be jobs that are running longer than your average time, for example. Maybe there is some network latency, maybe there is some timeout. The job is probably waiting for too long. We've seen a lot of examples where jobs have been running for days when their average runtime is just a few minutes, or probably even an hour to the max, right? So in such kind of scenarios, you could again use ops insights to kind of set some alerts. If the duration of a specific asset or all assets in a specific folder goes beyond an SLA or beyond a threshold, beyond their average runtime. So you could basically get notified, and if you think it's not an outlier and it seems like a trend, you could kind of make some decisions on either killing the task, or kind of figuring out where the network lag, or where the job has been waiting for too long, and then stop the IPU burn, right? So especially if you kind of leave these kind of jobs unnoticed, and have them run for days, you're going to see a huge spike in your IPs, because the duration would increase, and as you know, the meter is based on the duration of the job. So when the duration of the job increases, the IP is also going to keep increasing. And we have also seen scenarios where the job will just run for 3 days doing nothing, and then it'll actually error out. So for no value add for your business, or for your overall data pipeline, you would have ended up spending a lot of IPUs, which you could have proactively either killed or be notified to take some actions, right? So Ops Insights kind of gives you those options to get alerted if a duration of the job goes beyond a specific set threshold. It also gives you an option to kill the task if needed. If you're comfortable with killing the task, you could actually even toggle that on, and kill the task so that you don't have any IPU burn when no one is looking at the monitor, for example, right? Let's kind of look at the operational insights UI here. So this is one of the services that you will see as part of your services list. So once you log into Ops Insights, so the first thing that you could actually look for is your resource utilization, like we discussed. So if you look at the resource utilization of the specific agent, you will see the total overall uptime, and you'll also see the CPU usage and the memory usage of this agent, right? So if you see a constant trend line where it's consistently hitting more than 90% across multiple days, for example, then you know that you either have a scheduling problem, or you're basically undersized for this agent, right? So coming back to the max ATM process conversation that we had, so if your CPU is again spiking really high, and it's consistently at a higher threshold, then you know that you're basically trying to run more parallel jobs at the same time, and your agent is basically at capacity when you're running this high number of jobs, right? So this utilization would give you a very good trend line of if to figure out if your agent is rightly sized or if you have to scale up your agent based on your requirements, right? The next point of discussion that we had was setting up those long duration alerts. So if you go to alerts and if you click on data integration alerts, for example, you could actually set up an alert for a long running job if the duration is greater than either a few hours or 1 hour or minutes or seconds, and then you can actually get notified or you can even stop the task, right? So coming back to the scenario where if you don't have a team that's constantly monitoring these jobs, and there are some jobs you've been running for 2 or 3 days, for example, due to some latency issues and not really processing any records, then you might be in a scenario of higher IPU burn rate. So you might want to kind of set these alerts to make sure if someone is notified, and even if you want to make, if it's not going to cause any data inconsistency issues, you could actually even set the create the alert to stop the task so that the IPU burn is reduced. So these are a couple of ways how you could use ops insights for your CDI jobs to make sure your IPU utilization is within your boundaries and thresholds. So that's something that I want to quickly share as part of the best practices here. So let's kind of get on to more CDI best practices in the next slide. All right. So the next thing you could do is often you've seen customers using the wrong service or the wrong pattern for their use cases. For example, they might have to read or move files from say an FTP location or a local folder, for example, and move to a blob storage, right? And they would end up using CDI even though there are no transformations that they need to do on the data. So in CDI, you're literally reading row by row and then creating those new files or add to existing files. So or existing targets, for example, in a CDI job, which is actually not that efficient, right? So make sure that this is again not just for your IPU, but generally make sure that you're using the right pattern and the right services for your use case rather than trying to solve for your use case in an incorrect service, right? Because there are some functional overlaps across these services. There is a possibility that you could use a cloud application integration for a batch use case, or using cloud data integration for an ingestion use case, and so on, right? For example, if you use cloud mass ingestion, it doesn't go by duration at all. It just goes by the number of rows or volume, for example. Whereas in CDI, you might be having an inefficient mapping, which is running for a really long time when it's actually just an ingestion use case, right? So that's another thing that you could take a look at to make sure you're using the right services for your mappings or tasks or your use cases rather. Um, the next thing you could actually do is um, once you've identified from the metering report that there are these jobs which are actually consuming a lot of IPUs, and you've also checked on the other best practices that we just spoke about, you can start looking at the session logs to see um, if a mapping runs for say 30 minutes, for example, which transformation is it spending or where is it spending a long time on, right? So it could be at the source read, or it could be a specific transformation like a lookup, or it could be during the writing phase, right? So for example, you might have a pretty expensive lookup in your mapping, like which is so lookups basically you prep the lookup before you start the mapping, and if you're looking up against a table which has no keys or which is not optimized at the database level, for example, and it's a really high volume table, we'll pretty much be spending a lot of time on the lookups when the actual incoming data is just going to be, say, 5 records or 10 records, right? So just for processing such a small delta volume, just because you have a very expensive lookup, the total duration of the job would be higher, and you would spend a lot of IPUs on such scenarios, right? So jumping in, I mean, getting into the logs would give you such some deep drill down information on which transformation is actually using up a lot of time, right? The same way we have seen scenarios where that could the database that we are reading from is not optimized well, and a simple query of records for even 10,000 records, which is supposed to be pretty quick, actually takes a really long time to pull from the source and then push it to the pipeline, right? So again, you could find this in your logs by looking at the source transformation, the time taken to read records, and then see if there's something that you could optimize at the source, or even if you're using any transformations in between, which is talking to another source or another endpoint, to see if those endpoints themselves are rightly optimized. Right? It might not be an Informatica problem per se, but it could be just that the source is not rightly sized, for example. So these are some of the patterns that we have seen pretty common for IPU burn and how you could solve for those. Um, let's kind of jump on to cloud application integration, which is again one of the most widely used services in the IDMC platform, right? Now, just a quick recap here: cloud application integration, the meter is calculated based on the process runtime. So the longer your process runs, it's gonna increase your IPU consumed. One of the very common patterns that we again see in for customers who have a lot, a higher consumption for their CI services, by default, when you create a new process, it always runs on the cloud server. Now there could be scenarios where you wouldn't have to publish your process to external partners, or it need not be available on the internet or be deployed on our cloud service, which is hosted by Informatica, right? So which is on our infrastructure. And if you actually look at the rate card, the conversion rate for deploying the CAI process on cloud server is actually higher than on deploying on the agent. So if you go back to our ISCS org, you could actually see that. Let me kind of pull that up real quick. Just give it a minute for app integration to load here. So by default, when you click on a new process or when you create a new process, you're actually looking at the deployment option defaulting to the cloud server. So if you look at start here, it always runs on the cloud server by default, right? So again, as I mentioned, you probably don't have to deploy it on the cloud server based on your requirements. It's something that could run on your agent, and it's just internally consumed and need not be published over the internet, right? So the if you look at the rate card for an application integration process that's deployed on the cloud server, it's pretty higher than on the agent, right? So you could actually look that up right here. Rate card. So app integration with advanced serverless is 2.38 as the conversion, but if you just deploy it on the agent, it's just going to be 1.38, right? So that's a huge difference that you would see based on the deployment option you choose, right? And then going back to other best practices here, um, there might be scenarios where when you might be calling external APIs or third-party APIs from your CI process, and the response time of those APIs themselves would suddenly be longer, for example, right? So you can add in some error handling or some SLA checks where you expect the API response to come back in say a few seconds, a few milliseconds, for example, and suddenly if it says five spikes to 30 seconds, and this is a process that you call it, pretty much every other minute, for example, then this all adds up to the total IPU cost. This 30-second delay, for example, would add up to the IPU cost in a big way, right? So the best way to handle such scenarios is make sure you have some timer set and at the process level itself or at the configuration level, and you don't have your third party or external APIs respond beyond your SLA threshold, right? So that's something that you could take a look at if you're integrating with multiple systems and the response time of those systems suddenly increase, right? The Another scenario that we again see with customers is that could be a CA process which are called based on a record change in a source system. Like say there's a new record or an updated record in Salesforce, and it has to be propagated through a CA process to another endpoint, for example. And there would be scenarios where, for some reason, there's a bulk load at the source, and the number of API calls that are made just kind of spikes up based on the volume of the incoming records, right? So, so whenever there's like a bulk load of sorts, and the API is going to be called multiple times per second, you might want to kind of isolate such scenarios and see if there can be a one-off batch update, for example. So if you're going to have a large number of processes running in parallel, especially during these bulk loads, so you're just ingesting millions of records, and it's going to call million instances of CA process for every record change, for example. You're going to see a large volume of CA processes running on your agent, which is going to again cross a resource crunch, going back to the resource utilization that we spoke about in CDI, and probably even bringing on your CDI process or other services that are running on the same SIG agent, right? So so during these bulk loads, um, innumerable number of instances running in parallel would first of all cause a resource crunch and also spike up the IPS. So that's something that you could definitely avoid. Just make sure whoever is calling the CI process, for example, kind of you have some process set where you handle these bulk loads in a different fashion rather than just calling CA processes for every record change, right? For every row, for example. So for CI, these are the very common patterns that we see for IPU burn. Um, Again, as I mentioned, CI primarily runs based on process runtime. So however you could reduce the total process runtime, that would be more than enough. And the other thing that we spoke about, the cloud server, for example, is something that you could definitely look on because it's most of the scenarios you wouldn't probably need to publish your process on the internet. So um, these are some of the common themes that we've seen and repetitive, scenarios again with a lot of customers for reducing the total IPU burn rate. Um, so we kind of touched upon CDI, a little bit of CDQ and CAI, which are the major services that are used. Now, there could be other services that you're using, and based on the meter of that specific service, you just have to find out what's the best way to optimize, right? So, for example, say if you're looking at Cloud Integration Hub, for example, which goes by number of events, and you see a huge spike in the number of events coming by, we'll have to just kind of drill down a little deeper and figure out why are there so many events than the average scenario, right? So basically look at the meter for that specific service and see if you can optimize on the variables of the meter, right? So mass ingestion, for example, file mass ingestion goes by the file size, right? Is that a reason why we'll have to get a large file size every time you're ingesting data into a blob storage, for example, right? There might be scenarios where you could ask your third party and your vendor or whoever is ingesting the file just give you the delta rows, for example. So So go with the meter and the detailed report for that specific service. That would be a very good start for you to start optimizing and to see where your consumption is. But pretty much the theme is kind of similar across all of these services. And we would be happy to kind of share more best practices as we see across our customers, right? I hope this was helpful for you, and see you soon in the next webinar or support video. Have a good day. Thank you.
Hi all, we have reached the Q&A part. Please post your questions so Sriram and Kumar can answer.
We have a question from another Sriram here. So yes, this recording would be available in the Success Academy portal and also linked in our YouTube channel, support channel, so you can look at it later on. Yeah, I think there's a similar question from Turian. Yes, this is recorded. You'll find this recording in the Success Academy. Any other questions? There's another question from Greg. How do I get reports over multiple orgs? So there is a vacated parent org which will have the total aggregated IPU usage. So if you want individual org IPU usage, you just have to go to that specific org and get the granular information. But the parent org, which is tied to all your sandboxes and suborgs, will have the aggregated IPU usage across all of your orgs. There's a question, can I get a detailed report on which task flow? I'm not sure if you wanted to end that question. So task flows individually does not have any IPU consumption because task flows themselves call multiple mapping tasks or mass ingestion, file mass ingestion tasks, for example. So those individual tasks will have the IPU cost. There is no IPU cost of just running the task flow. There's another question from Pratik. I have 4 suborgs for the parent org using the same security region. It's not showing the consolidated usage. I didn't quite get that question. Can you kind of expand on that in a follow-up chat? If you have 4 suborgs with the parent org is using the same security agent, you mean you're sharing your security agent across the 4 of these suborgs and it's not showing the consolidated usage? Is that what your question is? And there's another question. Will you email the link to this webinar so we can share with colleagues? So you should be the same place where you registered for this webinar will have the recording. So you can just go back to the same page and the video recording of this would be available in the Success Academy portal. So Pratik, if you are looking at consolidated usage, so your parent org would show the consolidated usage of all your sub-orgs. But I think in your case, just because you have one singular agent, the agent group column, or I would say one single agent group, I believe, the agent group column is going to be the same. If you want to get individual sub-org information, just log into that individual sub-org and you should see the granular meter-wise consumption in each of those sub-orgs. But when you say consolidated, your parent org is going to show the consolidated aggregated IPU usage across your sub-org. So that should be already coming up for you. Okay, there's another question from Hiromitsu Susan. So do you suggest splitting the data masking jobs from CDI processing as well as CDQ jobs? So just to clarify here, right, in the CDQ jobs themselves have a meter rate of 0.38, if I'm not wrong, versus 0.16. So what you've seen with some of the customers is they kind of back up their data pipeline with a lot of CDI heavy transformations and CDQ transformations also. So what happens is if you look at the measurement guide, if there is even one CDQ transformation, it's going to use that as a CDQ job and apply 0.38 for this job when it's calculating the IPU cost, right? So there might be options for you if you're having a lot of heavy transformations like joiners, aggregators, or lookups and so on, along with your CDQ transformations. You may actually just split up the CDQ part alone and the CDI part following. You might have to obviously orchestrate it in a task flow or other means. But what happens is the CDI portion at least would be consuming just 0.16. And the CDQ portion will be consuming 0.38. So it totally depends on your pipeline. As Kumar mentioned earlier in the chat, if your use case kind of can be split, it will actually reduce, because think of it, right? If you have the whole pipeline as a singular mapping, for example, and it's going to apply 0.38 for all the CDI transmission and CDQ, you're going to pretty much look at a higher cost than split it up. And we have seen this with a couple of customers, at least in our experience. If the task is suspended or queued, does it still consume IPU? So if it's suspended, I think a task flow would be suspended. So if a task flow is suspended, obviously task flows themselves don't consume any IPUs. So there won't be any IPU cost for it. So yeah, if you're talking about the task flow as such, then there is no IPU consumption for task flows. There are some scanner execution which takes some IPUs. How to reduce that? So I think you probably have to take that offline. We are primarily from the cloud integration team. We'll have to see what that scanner transformation does and what are the different ways that we could reduce. But again, as I mentioned at the end of the slide, right? You just have to figure out from the measurement guide what contributes to the scanner meter, and then try to optimize for it. So that will be like the principal logic, but you might have to get back to us to see that is can we make it more efficient. So there's another question. So again, looks like someone didn't hear. Why would the recording be posted? It will be posted again with Success Academy, and also linked in our support channel in YouTube. So you should be able to search from that. And what's the other question that we have? Yeah, so there's a question from another Sriram here who says, I think what you're looking for is chargeback mechanisms. We do have those enhancements required in the backlog, so keep an eye on that using the change tracking feature in the Network Informatica portal. We should hopefully have an ETA soon on that. This has already been tracked internally, and our PMs and the R&D team are working towards it. Any other questions? Thanks, Frank, for the feedback. And we kind of add more of these videos once we see more best practices coming in other services also. So keep an eye on the webinar calendar. There's another question, like Snowflake, can we restrict the IPU? So those are all enhancements that we're looking at with respect to chargeback. Like you want to allocate just X number of IPUs to a business unit or a project or so on. At this point, there is no way to limit or restrict. So but yeah, we are working on some of those enhancements, so keep an eye on them in your new releases. All right. Another question: is there a way to set an alert to stop a task flow automatically when it's on suspended mode? I think this is a generic question. This is not specifically for IPU. You might have to kind of look at the task flow error handling options and then stop it. But yeah, there's nothing. Again, as mentioned, task flow does not access into many IPUs. Another question from Pratik. If the mapping task is simply doing a select stuff from table, copying data into the target, I assume you meant APDO, help in the scenario to save some IP consumption. Probably not a lot, but again, it totally depends on the volume of data and also the endpoint, right? Like say if it's Snowflake, say if it's SC to Snowflake, it kind of depends on the endpoint and the volume. But net, what happens in such scenarios is because this is just a source to target kind of scenario, enabling APDO might not be a big deal if you don't have any transformations. But again, this was a point that we made some time back, that for such scenarios, you might probably look at using mass ingestion. Mass ingestion as a service instead of doing CDI, because it is doing lift and shift from one table to a target. So that would probably give you a better efficient IPU consumption rather than using CDI. But yeah, if you're looking at APDO specifically where the source and target is supported, there's a lot of transformations in place which we could convert into APDO compatible queries, then yes, that will save some IPU consumption. There's another question for advanced serverless as egress part of the IPU cost. So advanced serverless has a fixed IPU cost. So what we look at it is once a job runs, we just have to look at the rate for advanced serverless, and we just use that for our IPU cost consumption. So it's the total runtime also into play, and there are some other variables that come into advanced serverless. But yeah, advanced serverless does contribute to the IPU cost. Another question, does Sandbox all use IPU in the same way as? Yes, there is no distinction between the org types. They all consume the same. It's all the same rate. IPU usage history, can we have an option to choose custom date? Yes. So when you say custom date, so the detailed report, when you download the detailed report, you have an option to choose custom range. But the drop-down itself, when you're looking at the dashboard in the UI, it's got the fixed value drop-down, right? 3, 6, 9, 13 months, right? So that's fixed. But if you look at the detailed report, you have a custom date range filter you can choose. So that's an option for the detailed report. All right. I think thanks again for all the great questions. They're all great. We will, as I mentioned, we will post this in the Success Academy and the YouTube support portal. And you should probably see the link shortly. Thanks again for joining in. And Harshita, I think over to you.
Thank you for this amazing session, Sriram and Kumar, for answering the question. We would like to inform that all Tech Tuesday webinar will be available on Success Portal under the Resources tab. And today's webinar will be available tomorrow, where you can view the recording and also download the slide deck. And please fill in the survey, as your feedback is important to us. And with that, we will end today's webinar. Thank you all for attending.